Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. The pumpkins have been terrific this year. They've done as well as I can remember, and this applies to the whole squash family. Pumpkins, squashes, courgettes have really loved this summer. And of course, that's mainly because it's been hot. They like heat. But the season's over. They're not going to get any bigger, and by and large, they're not going to get much riper, but there is a risk that too much rain and certainly frost will damage them. So now's the time to harvest them. And when you harvest a pumpkin, you do need to keep the stem intact, and that helps it store. And then when you cut it just above there, so you've got a T shape, like that. That then will store better. Right, I'm going to harvest all of these. And coming up on today's programme, Francis visits a secret conservation centre to look at the vital work they do to ensure the survival of rare and endangered flora.
We have some wild asparagus, only grows on the Gower Peninsula, it's on the red list for the UK. We also have black poplar, which is again rare in the wild in the UK. It's a native tree, but there are only about 7,000 plants left.
We pay a visit to Wreck a Mystery on her allotment as she enjoys all the rewards of this year's harvest.
It's quite heartwarming when you see your own produce hanging in the kitchen. This is organic, I've grown it, and I'm eating it.
And we go to Newcastle-under-Lyme to visit a garden that has been created using hundreds of pots.
I now have 700 pots in the garden. Sometimes I can't move. It's ducking and diving round the pots and underneath the plants.
And I shall be beginning a major revamp of the writing garden. I brought the pumpkins in here because it's actually just had a downpour, and you really don't want them to get too wet. A little bit of rain won't hurt, but definitely don't leave them sitting on wet ground. And if you've got nowhere else, put them on bricks or pallets so they're up off the ground and they can air. So these will stay here for another few weeks, and then we can store them in a cool, dark place. Now, the reason why I've come in here is because it's the end of the tomato season. It means that we can clear away this crop and use the space. So the first thing to do is to collect up the green tomatoes, because of course green tomatoes make great chutney, they make great soup, and you can ripen them. Put them in a dark drawer and they will slowly ripen. Now, Ned, I got this to put the green tomatoes in, not for a little dog to make his bed. Now, we have had a little bit of a problem with tomatoes. I can show you on this one up here, actually. If I cut this, you can see there is a mould. Now, this is caused by whitefly. The mould is growing on the excreta from the whitefly. And the reason why we had whitefly this year was because it was too dry. So if you see the signs of whitefly, get a hose and spray the plants, spray the ground, just raise the humidity, and that's the best defense against them, plus good ventilation. Which means we're going to have to wash these, but they're absolutely fine to eat, so that's not a problem. If you've got immature tomatoes, they're not worth keeping. They won't grow any bigger. So I'm just going to pick the decent sized ones. And you can see, look at the whitefly coming off. Whew. Right, you can see I've grown them up strings. So all I need to do to move them is to untangle them. The reason why I want to take them out with such urgency is because I want to use the space. If you've got a greenhouse and you've got a bed in the greenhouse, you want to make the most of it. Once these are out, I can dig it over, add a little bit of compost to freshen it up, and then plant out the rocket seedlings and the mitsuna and the mustard that will give us salads right through winter. Talking of harvest, it's time to go to North London and join Rekha Mistry on her allotment, where she's harvesting but also collecting as many seeds as she can.
I love gathering in the harvest. Though it's hard seeing plants die back, it's about the fruition of the year, planning for the future and storing what I've grown.
These are Biagadi chilies. They are very hot but very colourful, but the best thing about them is when they're dried, they keep their colour and their heat. It's quite heartwarming when you see your own produce hanging in the kitchen. There is something gorgeous about these things that is going into your food. This is organic, I've grown it, and I'm eating it. And when I ground them and I use my own chili, I could actually taste the flavour of each individual variety. People say it's just chili powder, but for me, there is something phenomenal about different varieties, different flavours, and yet they were all grown in one greenhouse.
This has been my year of beans. I've grown several heritage varieties, and they're all in different stages of readiness. This is the angel bean, the last one to ripen.
And it's probably the reason why they've fallen out of fashion, because it's taken so long. This late in September, they have just started to ripen. But I'm glad I grew this because it's the most amazing bean that it's going to create, with a little face of an angel.
These are my favorite pea beans, which can be eaten like peas when they're young, as whole beans in their mid-season, and now some are ready for drying.
The telltale signs of when your beans are ready is, one, they'll drop the leaves. The next thing you'll notice is they've gone from a green pod to a dry brown yellowy pod. But then the third sign is they are rattling. It's best to harvest them after midday, because in the morning at this time of the year, we're in September, there is dew over them, and it's nice to let them dry out naturally.
Dried beans can have weevil eggs inside, so I pop them in the fridge for a week, just in case.
I can imagine where these things are going to be in. There'll be lovely hearty stews mixed with all the pumpkins, all the chilies, all the potatoes that I've grown over the year. But the whole idea of grow your own is, even if you think it's a failed crop and you've just got a handful of beans, this is your next year's seed. So don't be disheartened. Grow them again, because they will grow better next year.
And though you can shell them if you wish, left in a warm, dry greenhouse or windowsill, they will pop open naturally too. All my onions and leeks I grow from seed, and I leave one or two to flower, so I've got seed the following year.
These are a heritage variety called Coloma, and I've grown it for 3 years now. I'm enjoying the life of a heritage seed. You get quality. Some leeks will not really do well in the winter. Some are really tough and they'll survive. This one survives, and it produces really thick stems of blanched white loveliness. I mean, each pod has got at least 3 to 4 seeds. This is more than enough for me and the whole probably allotment site.
In the wild, they'd shed their seeds where they grow. But as I rotate my crops, they come into the greenhouse.
The next stage I will do is allow it to dry out here as much as possible, and then I'll take it back indoors and at home, because the moisture-filled air in the winter time doesn't allow it to dry out as quickly. They will become very papery thin, these pods, and as soon as they become papery thin, they'll split open, and that's when I know they're ready, and I will clean them through and save them. I found that growing leeks from seed was so easy, so I tried to grow my own onions from seed, and I found they were much more successful than sets. I got the best onions ever, and I think I'm a bit onion obsessed. And now I've got some flat ones, some globe ones, some round ones, onions everywhere. I like to grow from my successful plants. They're my saved seeds. I know what they need. I know they'll grow well because they've grown well in the previous year. So I'm quite confident that they do well.
Amaranth is easy to collect seed from. Just lay the cut heads in a tray and give them an occasional shake. Mind you, they self-seed all over the place, so these will be for friends. One of my experiments this year was a safflower, which didn't look much, but was very successful.
This is safflower, and it's called poor man's saffron because saffron is so expensive to buy. This is the best alternative. I've just decided to cook them with some plain rice just to see if they catch colour, because that's the whole idea of saffron, is do they catch colour? Taste-wise, they don't taste like saffron. They've got a completely different floral taste, not the spice that saffron has. But it's done one job, so I'm happy about it, that it's coloured my rice. Next year I will grow safflower again from my own saved seeds, and that is a joy.
Not all my experiments worked quite so well. In 2021, I had a big aubergine test with 9 different varieties, and in the cold, wet summer, they all sucked. So I will try them again. But there was a big win.
This is my unexpected triumph, and it is a sugar cane that I started from a piece of sugar cane that I got from a greengrocer. It's not supposed to grow in this country, but I was determined. I tried about 3 times, and the 3rd time I said, right, that's it, you're getting one more go because it's costing me enough. And it grew. I think it must have heard me. I think the family are really glad that it's come to the greenhouse because the leaves are so sharp. They can cut you, but it needs to be back indoors. But what I'm more excited about is how I'm going to use it. And I think I would like to use them as skewers onto pineapple and then griddle them so there's sugar going into the pineapple. That's the idea, but that's just an idea. Until that grows, I'm not gonna wish too much. In terms of rec experiments, this is, I think, the pinnacle of 2021. But there's always one experiment I'll try every year, and so next year it's under wraps, but there is another experiment on its way.
I too dry my chilies, but I'm deeply envious of the ease and nonchalance with which Rekha threads her chilies. When I try, I'm pricking my finger and I'm missing and I'm not quite going through the middle of the stem and the whole thing is a mess. Now it's time to consider sowing sweet peas. If you sow sweet peas in October, you simply give the plant more time to develop a root system, and that means it's going to have more flowers. The other thing is it'll be earlier. Given the hot, dry weather we're increasingly getting in the middle of summer, it's good to get your flowers out as early as possible to enjoy them. Because I don't know about you, but my sweet peas were gone by the end of July. They really hate hot, dry weather. So sow some now if you can, and then another lot in March. And whenever you sow them, the technique is the same. Now, I like to use these pots. These are 3-inch pots. I've had them for years and years with a container, and I recycle them. And what I do is to sow 3 seeds to each of these pots. The other way of growing them, and some people swear by this, is by using root trainers. Now, these are root trainers. Sweet peas have got a long taproot, and these open out like a book, and you close them up like that. They lock together, and then you stack them into these special containers that come with the root trainers. And the beauty of them is that the roots grow down nice and straight. And then when you come to plant them, instead of pulling them out, which risks damaging the roots, you open them up again, lift it out and plant it. In principle, these work really well and I highly recommend them. In practice, my system of growing them in the pots seems to be just as effective, but I do use both. Either way, you want a compost that is rich. These are hungry, greedy plants. If you buy your normal peat-free compost, add in ideally sieved garden compost, or failing that, buy a bag of soil conditioner and add some of that in. Right, I will fill these. I'm going to do this over here. There we go. Right, now we're ready. I've got two varieties here. The first one is Kupani, which is beautiful, smells fantastic, and it's one of the very, very best. Now, you may have read or been told that you should soak sweet pea seeds first, or that you need to nick them with a sharp knife in order for them to germinate. I have never done either, and they have always germinated fine. Now, this is another really old-fashioned, lovely variety called Painted Lady. A lovely pink bicolour and the most fantastic fragrance. Now, into these, I'm just going to put one seed. Right, the last few in there. Now, sprinkle a little bit of compost over the top. Put them somewhere warm to germinate. Doesn't need to be a heated greenhouse. A windowsill will do fine, a porch, as long as it stays above about 15 degrees. And water them well. These should never be allowed to dry out. Really important, label them. And once they've germinated, then they can be moved ideally to a cold frame, but as long as they're protected from frost and torrential rain, they will grow into young plants, and then they will stop growing around about sort of middle of November, and they'll overwinter but start again as soon as the days get longer at the beginning of February. Right, I'll take both of these to the greenhouse, but it's time to visit one of your gardens. And this includes, I'm glad to say, both the back garden and the front garden.
Hi Gardeners World, my name's Mel and welcome to my new build garden in Upminster on the very edge of East London. This is my back garden, so it is 6 by 6 metres, so a small space, but I'm trying to make sure that it packs a punch. So where I can, I try to grow from seed and tuber and bare root. These are my biennials, so seeds that I've sown now for flowering next year. This is my front garden, and this is on a really, really busy main road in the town centre. Got a supermarket opposite, some bus routes, so I felt like a lot of pressure was on me to keep it looking nice. And hopefully I have, and I basically planted lots of low maintenance plants in here. I did the bed. It was very, very heavily compacted, as a lot of new build gardens are. So I raised it with some log edging and got lots and lots of organic matter in. So it was basically set up kind of like a no-dig bed. So thank you Gardeners World for letting me show you around my little garden, and I hope some of what I've done here might inspire you in your outdoor spaces.
Come on. I think it looks terrific, Mel, and so inspirational. Now this stone trough had thyme in it all summer. And I confess the thyme has all died because it is very, very shallow, and even Mediterranean herbs like thyme need some water, and I confess I hadn't watered them once throughout the blazing heat of this summer. However, it's given me an opportunity because I'm going to plant crocus in here. The variety I'm using is Siberia tricolour. It's purple with white and orange, hence the tricolour. And you can see that each of these bulbs has got a little shoot. That needs to be sticking upwards, pointy end up always. I'm not planting them, I'm just placing them. And when I've placed them all, I'll put them in. And one of the reasons I haven't pushed them in is because I want to be able to see where they are. So these are about 2 inches apart. And if it was a smaller container, they could be a lot closer. Now you can plant crocus anytime from September through till November. Now putting them in a grid like this works in a rectangular container. You won't notice that once they start to flower. You'll just have this sea of petals. So what we now need to do is just push them in, down, so they're buried. I'm not pressing on top of the shoot, but actually pushing on either side of it. There's absolutely no risk of them drying out because there's bound to be enough rain. But there is a real risk of them rotting by being too wet, which is why I've got so much grit in here. The grit ensures that they have really good drainage, which is what they and tulips and muscari like. Daffodils will take a little bit more moisture, and snowdrops and fritillaries actually like it fairly damp. And then just smooth it over, and there we are. There'll be nothing to see here till after Christmas, and then the shoots will start to appear in January and the flowers in February, and they should last for about 3 or even 4 weeks. And as well as looking glorious with a kind of jewel-like intensity, which will open out when the sun shines, they are a really good source of nectar for the early pollinators like the bumblebees. I have a lot of containers at all times of year here at Longmeadow, but particularly for bulbs. They're absolutely brilliant for tulips and daffodils, in fact, any bulb you like. But although I have a lot, it is as nothing compared to the garden we went to visit in Staffordshire, which takes container gardening to its glorious extreme.
People that I tell about the garden, they just can't believe how many pots and containers I've got in the garden. I now have 700 pots in the garden. Sometimes I can't move. It's ducking and diving round the pots and underneath the plants. My name's Joanne, and this is my container garden in Newcastle under Lyme, Staffordshire. When I moved to this property, there was just lawn, a greenhouse and an old shed. I bought a pot and a plant, and it just suddenly exploded with being interested in gardening. I love all different types of containers and pots. Anywhere I can put a pot, I just keep buying plants and I find more space, and I'll just continue to buy plants because I love plants. I knew that if I started gardening, I would always have a good teacher in my mum, because she gardens with pots and containers too. I love foliage, big foliage, and each season I will add spring flowers. Then in the summer I add the dahlias, the geraniums, the zinnias, all the other flowers. So it just changes throughout the year, and that's the beauty of containers and pots. The back garden is roughly 12 metres by 12 metres. I've planted it all in different sections so that you don't see it all in one go. You have to walk around the garden to see all the different areas that have been planted up. This is the main sitting area where you step out of the house into the garden. We've got the succulents here and the aeonium mixed with the geraniums, the ferns, lichness. The lichness self-seeds. I don't like gaps in the garden, so it will just get bigger each year. This hydrangea here is called Little Lime. It starts off a creamy white flower, and late summer into autumn it turns a lovely shade of dark pink. It follows up through the garden because there is spaces where I've got the pink working the way all down the garden. I first started growing dahlias last year. I grow them in 35 litre pots. This dahlia is called Cabana Banana. Just love the shape of the flower, and the colour is really beautiful too. They need plenty of water with them being in containers, and I do feed them every couple of weeks. I find that putting pots at the side of pathways means that the foliage or the flowers can soften the edges and just looks better in the garden too. This is my favourite hosta. It's called Tea at Betty's. It's about to flower again, and they flower in early spring. All these hostas are kept all the way along the side of the house. It's a shady position which they really love. I use garlic spray to keep away the slugs and snails. I feed all the pots with liquid seaweed and tomato feed using 2 watering cans. I very rarely use a hose pipe, so it can take 2 to 3 hours to water almost 700 pots. This is a gunnera that's planted in a container. It's planted with compost and grit. It gives a jungle look to the garden with the big leaves and the spiky stems. And with it being in a container, it restricts the growth, whereas if it was grown in the ground, you would be able to walk underneath the plant because they grow rather large. I am aware that this particular gunnera is an invasive species, so I will be removing the flower to stop any seed spreading, and this is the reason why it's in a container. And this plant is just amazing. It creates such an impact in the garden. I love sempervivums, all the different textures and shapes and colours. I also love echeveras. The colours are just amazing. All these are the echeveras as well. I've also got houseplants in the greenhouse. Tradescantia. There's ferns that I have as houseplants. They've come outside. This string of hearts didn't do very well in the house, so I thought I'd try it outside in the greenhouse. The disco ball was in the garden hanging from a tree, but the loop broke, so I decided to put it in the greenhouse where the sunlight would catch it and shine all around the garden. Once I come in the garden, I can be out here for 8 to 9 hours. Just a peace and quiet, you can switch off. Gardening has totally changed my life, and I am really proud of what I've created.
Well, I think that's proof, if you needed it, that you can have a rich and varied garden grown entirely in containers. And of course you can grow trees in containers, and people do. But if you can plant a tree in a border like this one or into grass, then the options increase hugely. And I currently think the best garden tree that suits most gardens are crab apples. There are lots and lots of different types of crab apples, but this is my favorite. This crab is Comtesse de Paris. And I love it for a number of reasons. It's got a lovely shape. Its blossom is elegant. And then these fruits, which at the moment are sort of lemon yellow, but they will become a rich golden orange. Now, Still to come on today's programme. Frances visits the botanists who are doing vital work to preserve our rare horticultural heritage.
These are taken from Isaac Newton's apple tree.
What, the one where the apple fell on his head?
Yeah, allegedly it fell on his head, but yeah, that's where he came up with the theory of gravity.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
This apple kind of changed our understanding of the universe.
Absolutely.
And we meet a gardener who curates an extraordinary collection of trees.
10% most people have heard of. The other 90 they wouldn't have heard of, but they should, because they are prettier, more interesting. You don't have to always stick to your cherries and your rowans.
But first, we're visiting one of your gardens and one of our younger gardeners, Nian Chandegra in Cardiff.
Hello Gardener's World, my name is Nian and welcome to mine and my dad's garden in Cardiff. When we first moved here, there was nothing in this garden except the lawn. Me and my dad designed this garden and planted lots of flowers and trees. Behind me we have grown some lovely sweet peas. This is our shady area, so we have grown some hostas. And look how big they are. Here is our garden pond. Here we've grown some beautiful dahlias. This is our vegetable border, and we have a banana plant, some sweet corn, and a tomato plant. I've grown all of these by myself, but I needed my dad to have a little help with me. Thank you, Gardener's World, and I hope you enjoyed our garden. Bye!
Well, I love your garden, Nian, and you're clearly already a very good gardener. Now, I confess that I haven't been a very good gardener when it comes here to the writing garden, and I'll explain to you why. The writing garden was grass, and in spring it was lovely because it had cow parsley in the grass, and you got that wonderful foaming white froth that only lasts for about a week or so. I thought if I could make a garden that would extend that lovely feeling for months, then that would be really good. And so, took the turf up and started to plant, and for about 2, 3, 4 years, it worked really well. But I've lost the magic because I've got the planting wrong. I've added too many shrubs, and they're creating too much shade, they're taking up too much moisture, and all that delicacy has been lost. So, I'm going to take the shrubs out. I'm going to remove all the shrubs, going right back to here. And everything, including this clematis, the roses, the lilac, the hydrangeas, they're all coming out. I'm going to start with this spirea. Now, spirea has lovely white flowers that foam on these arching branches. If it was going to stay here, you don't prune a spirea by just reducing it in size because you want the branches to arch. The best way to do it is to get right down into the plant and remove about 1/3 at the base, like that. But because I'm going to move this, I'm simply going to take a handful like that and cut across and reduce it down in size. I would stress the reason why I'm doing this. It's not for the benefit of the plant. The plant won't like this treatment, but it's critical because when we dig it up, we're going to leave most of the roots behind, particularly the feeding roots, which are at the edge of the root growth. So you have to cut the plant back, put it into warm soil, either in a pot or in the ground, let the roots re-establish. So by next spring, when new growth starts, there's a chance that they'll be able to be up to the job of feeding all this new growth. But I will continue with this. But first, we're going to visit what amounts to a private arboretum, because this is a garden belonging to David Ewing, just outside Bath, where he has amassed over the last couple of decades a fascinating and large collection of unusual trees.
My passion for trees started when I saw a Paulonia tree in Jersey, and the leaves were so large I couldn't believe it. Then, having seen another Paulonia in the south of France, St. Paul de Vence, and that was in flower, and that was so spectacular. So I decided to try and collect another one, and then another one. I now have all 10, and I do have the Plant Heritage National Collection for Paulonia. This is my largest Paulonia. It really is something of a giant. Indeed, it's a champion tree of Great Britain. And as you can see, this is only 16 years old. Now look, I can't even remotely get my hands around it. So that's got to be 1.5 meters round in 16 years. The leaves are wonderful, the height is wonderful. This really is quite spectacular. My arboretum expanded into other varieties when I went round other people's houses and arboretums, and there were so many spectacular trees. So as I saw one I liked, I tracked it down and bought it. And this has gone on for 20 or 30 years, and I've ended up with 100+ rare trees. This is the Chinese necklace tree, Populus lasiocarpa. As you can see, it's quite spectacular with its leaves and this cotton wool. Now this only comes perhaps once every 3 or 4 years, and even then only if there's not a lot of wind, if there's not a lot of rain, and you've got to be mid-July, and all of that is what's happening here. So we've ended up with the most spectacular tree possible, lasiocarpa. Trees are so easy to look after. Once you've planted them and they're growing, after a couple of years you need to water them to start with, they then just grow on their own. And you've got all the seasons. You've got magnolias in March and April, and then you've got leaf trees later, and you get flowering trees even after that. So you've got about 6 months of different enjoyment in the garden without having to do anything. So I think it's a lazy man's way of gardening. I've been here 20 years. There was a few woodland trees here, but I gradually started to put trees in from 19 years ago, most of which are really unusual. I suggest that perhaps 10% most people have heard of, the other 90 they wouldn't have heard of, but they should, because they are prettier, more interesting. Spiky, flowery, tall, yellow. You don't have to always stick to your cherries and your rowans. This is a Calopanix pictus, sometimes known as a castor oil tree, and it's well known for its fearsome spines. This particular version has these unusual leaves, a bit like a hand. This is just a shoot out the side, but as you can see, equally fearsome prickles. That's 1 year old. This is 15 years old. This will be just like that in 15 years. Almost every day, certainly every week, you can come out and see something new. That's quite exciting. We've got a tree today, a Fermiana simplex, that's got flowers coming. First time ever in 15 years. I found that teenage trees are the best. They're at their peak. They're not so big you can't see them. They're not so small they're irrelevant. Teenage trees, I commend. This is a golden weeping beech, bright yellow in May and June, absolutely stunning, but it is very slim and very tall. I put up a few stakes to hold it and a couple of wires as well. After 10, 12 years, the trunk will be fine. You can take away these poles and the wire, and then you just have a spectacular weeping yellow tree that everyone adores. For normal-sized gardens, magnolias are a very good bet. They're quite pretty in leaf and they're beautiful in flower and last for probably a month. This is a Magnolia wilsonii, and it's known particularly because it has downward-facing flowers. All other magnolias virtually all have upward-facing flowers. The flowers are gone now, but they are beautiful. They're white with yellow and black in the middle. But once they've gone, they have these amazing seed pods. They will have seeds and they could germinate, but the main thing about this tree is plant it high and look at it from underneath. Just beautiful. There's the Judas tree, the Cercis siliquastrum. That is just stunning and not large, but in May completely covered in flowers. Dogwoods, a bit like the one behind us, the Cornus controversia variegata, which is the wedding cake tree. All of these are small enough to go in a normal garden. If you've got a little more room, then Davidia, involucrata, handkerchief tree, such fun. You have to wait 11 years to get the handkerchiefs, but they are very pretty. These are silver birches. They're very beautiful. This particular one is called Snow Queen and is my favourite. Very tactile, as you can see. But if you grow them together, they were about a metre apart when I first grew them, they start to grow outwards and they form this one big canopy, which is so pretty. They'll do that in 10 years. These are perhaps 14, 15 years old. One of my favourite trees of all in my garden is this Pinus patula. It is known as a Mexican weeping pine. It is tactile, it is soft, it is beautiful. This one happens to be about 15 years old. It's doing very well, and other than needing a little bit of protection from the coldest winds, it is the tree to have. So, Pinus patula, give it a try. Someone once said that the best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago. The next best time to plant a tree is now. I've always thought that's really good.
Although David's collection is fascinating, I would say don't be put off planting an ordinary tree, an oak, a birch, whatever grabs your fancy, and do it now. October's a brilliant time to plant. Now, I'm trying to dig out the roots here of this spirea, and I'm digging out a trench all around it so I can get underneath. I'm going to move you, you sleepy boy. There you go, you stay there. The ideal way to do this, as a counsel of perfection, is to dig out a trench like I am now a year before you intend to move it. Backfill the trench with leaf mould or potting compost, something quite fine. And that will encourage the roots to be very fibrous, so that when you dig it up a year after that, it'll come away better and it will transplant better. Mind out now. The spirea are plants that actually grow in most soils. They like sun, if you can give it to them, but they'll grow in some shade. Right, I'm going to put this into a bag. Bags are brilliant for relatively temporary accommodation for plants. If you know you're going to keep a plant from now till next spring, a pot is much better. I will pack that with potting compost, so none of these roots are exposed, and that is important, whether it's in a bag or in a pot. But hopefully it will recover. I've got a place lined up for it, so I'll probably plant this in a couple of weeks' time. But now we're going to join Frances, and she went to visit the National Trust Conservation Centre in a secret location, where they do some really important work.
I've come to a trust property with a difference. No grand driveway or ornate buildings here. This is their plant conservation centre in rural Devon, and the heritage being preserved is in plant form. Some have even called it the nation's horticultural crown jewels. It's not open to the public, and in fact they would prefer its exact location to remain secret. They take security very, very seriously, including biosecurity, which means I have to wash my feet incredibly carefully. It's quite a process. Okay, so we start with a brush, and then in the foot, wash, bit of spray, and then I have to cover my shoes with plastic covers. Alison Crook is the curator here and has agreed to be my guide. Alison, tell me what plants you're growing here and why you're growing them.
So we have a huge mix of plants here that form part of the living collection within our gardens and parklands, and indeed our countryside.
And your job is to propagate them all.
Yes, to propagate them all and conserve them if they are of special significance. So if they have great stories associated with them. For example, here we have a collection of limes. These are 13 clones, each one is unique. They all have different growth habits, they all have different colours. But if you're thinking about a historic lime avenue that goes on for, maybe a mile in one of our properties, if one of those trees were to die and you wanted to put another tree back in, you would have to make sure that that tree didn't stand out within that line. So you want exactly the same clone to go back there.
And of course, the Trust doesn't just have these amazing, huge gardens, but also really large swathes of countryside as well to look after.
Yes, absolutely. We do some propagation for wild plants within our countryside properties. So we have some wild asparagus. Only grows on the Gower Peninsula. It's on the red list for the UK. We also have black poplar, which is, again, rare in the wild in the UK. It's a native tree, but there are only about 7,000 plants left. So we have a whole bunch of male and female plants on site that we will be growing on and then giving back to our rangers to plant in the countryside.
Inside the centre's huge polytunnel, thousands of plants are stored and grown on, and some have a truly extraordinary lineage.
Here's some more of our cool plants. These are taken from Isaac Newton's apple tree.
What, the one where the apple fell on his head?
Yeah, allegedly it fell on his head, but yeah, that's where he came up with the theory of gravity.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
This apple kind of changed our understanding of the universe.
Absolutely.
So this is what, snipped from the very tree?
The very tree, several hundred years old, at his childhood home in Woolsthorpe Manor, and grafted then at this property here, and we send them out all over the country to make sure that they are protected. You walk around here and every plant you go past has a story.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It's very cool.
The second plant Alison is dying to show me is a yew. But of course, it's not just any yew.
This one is from the Ankerwick yew. So that's where the Magna Carta could have been signed and where King Henry VIII proposed to Anne Boleyn.
Under one yew tree?
Yeah, it was absolutely massive in its day. It must have really stood out on the landscape. It's 2,500 years old.
Wow.
And this is one of its children. Some of the plants that we've propagated from this have gone back to Runnymede, which is near the Ankerwick yew, to form an avenue. And they could be there for another 2,500 years. So we're always thinking very much into the future.
Yeah, you've got a really, really huge window of history and future, haven't you, to think about? It's a big legacy, isn't it?
It is.
It's in the propagation house that the hands-on work to protect our vital living heritage is done, work which has resulted in numerous tales of rescue. And one of my favourites is about this. It's a lovely little daffodil called the Tamar Double White that used to be part of the cut flower industry, which was huge down here in the southwest. Assumed lost for decades, when a single specimen of this lovely flower was discovered and brought here, it was saved by a rare technique called twin scaling, at which the centre's horticulturist Ellie Pay is an expert. And the first step is to take off the bulb's outer sheath. Whenever I've grown bulbs, I've always just let them do this, which this one's doing, and just sort of naturally multiply. So I've never tried this technique, but I'm guessing there's a reason for doing it this way instead.
Well, because we can get many more. And from one bulb, I can get at least 20 plants. If you have something that you want to bulk up, then this is the obvious choice.
OK. Before making any cuts, it's crucial to sanitise the surface and put on gloves.
We want to clean up the root plate, just because it's got old stuff on it. It might have microbes in it that could rot it. So we're going to chop that off very delicately. So now we're going to be cutting it into half, so straight down.
OK. I'm going right through to the bottom on this cut.
Cut all the way through.
All the way through, halving it. OK.
Yeah. Take it in half and then put it on its flat side, so then you can work on it again. Then we're going to cut it one more time. In half. So I make them really nice and thin. So then what I do is I work from the back rather than the front, is I start prying it away. So you grab 2 scales, so you can get your razor blade, and 2 scales is the smallest you can get it down to. Because if you have 1 scale, you might lose part of the root plate, and then you won't be able to grow the bulblet. And then also the 2 scales means that the bulblet is sat in between them, nice and snug and safe.
I see. Hence the name, twin scaling.
Yes.
Once we've got our twin scales, it's just a case of slicing them off. Then Ellie shakes them in fungicide, puts them in a sterilised bag containing vermiculite. A couple of months in an airing cupboard and they'll be ready to be potted on. So imagine that I found the last ever Tamar double white narcissus in a hedgerow in a car park. How long does it take before that single bulb is propagated, goes through all of this, and then starts to appear in gardens and is sort of saved from near extinction?
Well, it probably takes 5 to 7 years for the bulbs to become full size. And then so probably maybe 10 years before, you know, they're distributed through all the gardens.
That's amazing. It's quite the process.
It is, yeah.
The plants that have been propagated here are truly precious stock, protecting and replenishing some of our loveliest landscapes. And I love that it's a kind of horticultural hall of fame. This is rhododendron Mrs. Russell Sturgis, a favourite of Winston Churchill, once thought lost, but found and salvaged here. This is the famous Irish yew from Florence Court, the probable parent of Irish yews across the world. And this is a work in progress. It's thought to be Gladiolus cross-brenchliensis, which was a favourite plant of Gertrude Jekyll, but sadly lost to cultivation for many years. That is, until 14 years ago, when someone thought that they found it in their garden. And since then, the team here have been growing it on in the hope that it turns out to be correct. And if it is, in fact, that Gladiolus, this will just be another jewel from the past that's been restored and secured for the future by this remarkable place.
I confess I didn't know that centre existed, but it's clear they're doing such important and interesting work. Now, these are broad beans. This is a variety called red epicure. And if you sow broad beans now, the advantage is you'll get a harvest 2, maybe 3 weeks earlier next spring. But I confess that most years, when I sow them outside into the soil, slugs eat them, the weather bashes them and they tend to bend and need a lot of support. And by and large, it doesn't feel worth it. So I've started to grow them in pots where I can protect them from the weather, I can protect them from slugs, and then plant them out when a piece of ground is ready. So just put 1 bean per pot, and I will sow more next spring. And I will label that before I move on, red epicure. Not all broad beans are suitable for growing in autumn. The traditional one that everyone used to grow early were aquadulci. They're very hardy. They're one of the few plants that will germinate when the soil is really quite cold. Right here I'm going to grow another variety, and this is super aquadulci, which is especially good for growing at this time of year. And I might well plant these out sort of January or even if it's very mild before Christmas. As long as they've got a decent root system, they could go out in the ground. These will germinate perfectly well if you just put them outside in a corner, so you don't need to waste greenhouse space on them if you're pushed. Right, that's a small job that I do every year. Here are some jobs, big and small, for you this weekend. All the wildlife in your garden will be preparing for winter. Some of them hibernating, some of them just looking for a safe home. And the best thing you can do for them now is to create a pile of wood. This can be twigs, prunings, old logs, rotten wood, soundwood. It really doesn't matter. Just stack them up, and that will be the best home that a whole host of creatures could possibly find. Cloches are really useful in the vegetable garden, not just to protect from cold. Crops like chicory or radicchio can easily rot if it's very wet. And if you put a cloche over them with open ends so it's got good ventilation, this acts as an umbrella and extends the harvest. Now is an excellent time to take rose cuttings. Choose a good straight stem of new growth and cut it as long as you can. You're looking for pieces about a pencil thickness. Divide it up into lengths between 6 and 9 inches long, stripping off all the leaves. Cut the bottom of each section horizontally and the top at an angle. This way you know to put them the right way up. Use a good free-draining compost, either in the ground or into a pot. They don't need any protection from the weather, but they will take 6 to 12 months to root. Doing a little bit of deadheading on this helianthus. This is Helianthus lightiflorus, which we've had for a number of years and been dividing and moving around the jewel garden, and now it's really hitting its stride. But actually you can prolong the flowering, if it stays mild, for a few weeks if you deadhead them, and so they put their energy into producing new flowers rather than going to seed. Well, that's it for today. We'll be back next week a day earlier on Thursday and an hour later at 9 o'clock. So I'll see you back here at Longmeadow at 9 o'clock on Thursday night. Till then, bye-bye.